Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp Podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and it has been way too long since we have done a campfire chat. If you're new around here, a campfire chat is basically a Q&A meets an advice column, meets a confession session, meets a wild card crazy stories. Basically, it's an anything goes submission. We're kind of trying to recreate the feeling of sitting around a campfire together, asking each other questions, telling stories, talking about what's on our mind. So that's what we're going to do today. And as usual, I have a very fantastic lineup of submissions. Thank you for submitting. If you want to submit, by the way, just keep an eye on the Girls Camp Podcast Instagram. That's where I put up these submission boxes for campfire chats or any other episodes. So I often have people asking me about that. Just keep an eye on the Girls Camp Podcast stories. I do have a little life update, which is that this past weekend, I got my fourth tattoo. If you're watching on YouTube, hopefully you can see it in all its glory. It's on my forearm and it says, "Be merry." I am so excited. It's so fun to get a tattoo. It's been a long time since I got one, and I've been wanting to get my fourth one for a long time. How it works in my brain with tattoos, at least how it has worked the 4 times I've done it, not that I'm some veteran, but I'll usually have an idea for a long time. Like I'm sitting on an idea for at least 6 months and I'm kind of thinking it through and thinking about if I'm getting words, like what font I want it in and where exactly I want it. And I'm thinking about it and thinking about it. And then one day I wake up and the flip has switched in my mind and I'm like, I'm going to do it. And it's not even that I feel like I have it so fully, perfectly thought out. It's just like I'm finally ready to just make the leap and get something permanently put on my body. On Wednesday of last week, I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready for my Be Merry tattoo. I've kind of been talking about it, thinking about it. I called Mercy Tattoo in Salt Lake City. They're amazing. I love to go to my girl, Allie at Vibe Tattoo Co. Shout out Vibe Tattoo. But you have to make an appointment. So if it's last minute, I like to call Mercy because they're super reliable. They did my first tattoo of the butterflies. I just know they do a good job. So I called them, got an appointment for Friday, and I went and got my tattoo. I was talking to Bentley last night about this because I was kind of working through, before I got the tattoo, the fact that this tattoo feels to me like my ex-Mormon tattoo. And I think a lot of people get an ex-Mormon tattoo, and I think it's a great thing to do. I mean, it's a big deal to, I don't have to convince you if you're here listening, but I was feeling a little bit of like defensiveness to maybe a perceived idea of people seeing me get a tattoo, be merry. I'm going to talk about, maybe some of you are like, what are you even talking about? Be merry is from a verse in the Book of Mormon. It is actually being said in the Book of Mormon as like something that you shouldn't do is be merry. Let me just read the verse straight out of the horse's mouth, out of the Book of Mormon. So in this chapter, it's 2 Nephi 28. The author is basically saying like, watch out for these false doctrines that people are going to be saying in the last days. There shall be many which shall say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, and it shall be well with us. So that's like one of the worst things within Mormonism that I was taught since I was a little girl was to eat, drink, and be merry because you just think, well, tomorrow we die, so what's the big deal? I have a little bit of defensiveness around people being like, well, why are you trying to make such a point about being ex-Mormon that you're getting this tattoo and it's from the Book of Mormon? Like, just leave it alone. That whole thing. As I was kind of working through that, I realized, yes, there's something fun about reclaiming this thing that was said in the Book of Mormon to be the worst thing ever. And now being like, that's actually my life motto. And I'm going to put it on my body in a cute little font. But it actually is so much more than that to me because that is my life philosophy now in a really big way. Like if I were to distill my life philosophy down, I would say my biggest priority is to be present in the here and now, to maximize the time that I know I have, to not take things so seriously because one day we will all die, and that's actually a beautiful thing. And that gives me a lot of almost like confidence just to realize the whole like we're just on a floating rock in space. So you may as well live your life on your own terms and maximize your own happiness. This tattoo, yes, it's like this fun ex-Mormon thing, but it's so much more than that. It's about reclaiming what I was taught was the worst thing ever. And now realizing I actually think that that is like one of my guiding stars of how I want to live my life. And it just so happens to be really kind of beautifully distilled into this 1-2-word phrase, be merry. So there's me getting probably way too deep about my tattoo, but it was just interesting to think about that with the whole ex-Mormon, like you left the church, why can't you leave it alone, which we've talked about so much, but realizing it's about so much more than just the church. It's about really figuring out like your core philosophies of identity and life. And so much of that is just going to be naturally in contrast to the things that you were taught for most of your life up until that point. I also think getting tattoos is so fun. I was saying this to Bentley because we were in the tattoo shop and they have all this beautiful artwork on the walls, like these tattoo ideas. And I was asking Bentley, do you want to get another tattoo soon? He just has one tattoo on his thigh. It's a butterfly. And he was saying he's just very indecisive. So it's hard for him to decide, which I think makes a lot of sense. It's a big decision. It's a permanent thing on your body. But for me, it's really fun to take that leap and just do it, do something so permanent. I feel like for me and the way I operate, it feels like a nice practice in letting go and just being like, you know what? I've thought about this enough. Now I'm just going to do the damn thing. And it's not that big of a deal anyway. I think it's another really nice way to push back against this idea that a tattoo is such a big deal and it's, you know, graffiti on your temple as we were taught as Mormons, and just being like, nah, like I can just get this on my body and it's not that serious. So anyway, lots of waxing philosophical about tattoos. Let's now wax philosophical about these campfire chat submissions. Also, I'm sorry if my voice is a little sick sounding. I have had not even a full cold. I feel like this is the time of year. Maybe it's even allergy related. I don't know. I feel like I've started to get hay fever, but I've just had like sinus stuff and congestion for like 2 weeks, and it hasn't really materialized into a cold. But anyway, if I sound kind of sick, my apologies. My very true believing mom and her best friend were chatting the night before a serious surgery. Her best friend says, if things don't go as well as we hope, I'm at peace. I'd rather deal with this than one of my kids leaving the church or having a faith crisis. My mom relayed this conversation to me, agreeing with her friend, all while knowing full well that I'm not an active member in some way, shape, or form. I haven't worked up the courage to tell her I officially left the church over a year ago, for obvious reasons. Like, WTF, I don't even know how to feel about it or what to do with that information. If things don't go as well as we hope, is she referring to dying, this best friend, during surgery? I don't know if she's referring to dying or just having serious complications, but she is saying she would rather either die or have very serious complications from a surgery than to deal with one of her kids leaving the church or having a faith crisis. Whew, lots wrong with that. And I feel like we've examined this from many angles, but the thing that stood out to me about this, reading it again, is this idea that I'm learning in therapy. I don't know why I'm feeling like not even insecure, but I'm just that girl now who's going to be talking about therapy all the time. In therapy, one thing that I'm learning is that so much of my problem in life and mental health is that I have an external locus of control as opposed to an internal locus of control. So basically, I'm letting factors outside of my control disturb my peace. And if you live that way, your peace will always be disturbed because you're not in control of it. Where if you have an internal locus of control, then regardless of what's going on around you, you just have more stability because the control is inside of you. And I'm just thinking about this in reference to this woman and this mother, and thinking about how she's basically saying, my children and their decisions, which is very much outside of her locus of control, have so much power to affect her well-being and her own peace. And I think that the church really, really creates these dynamics in families where, I mean, another therapy term here is like enmeshment, where it's just really hard for Mormon families to allow family members to live their own lives because they feel like what their family members do is the most important thing to them, what their family members do in terms of religion. And so it creates really toxic dynamics because not only is that insanely toxic for the children who are being told, oh, my mom would rather die in surgery than have me question my faith. That's crazy. But then these Mormon parents who are thinking this way, they're living completely out of control because their whole state of being is based on if their child decides that they want to stay in the faith of their upbringing or not. And this is where I think the church has a lot of responsibility and accountability for very much encouraging those dynamics via, hundreds and hundreds. I could pull thousands of quotes probably of like, you not only need to get yourself to heaven, you need to get your family members to heaven. I think moms take that on in a particular way too, because they're the ones raising the kids. It feels like their worth is dependent on their child's choices around faith. And it's just a mess. It's a total mess. And it's not fair to put families in those situations because it just sets up these families who have adult children figuring things out for themselves to just not thrive. So I'm very sorry you have that information. This was one of the things that kind of pushed me into finally being open with family members and friends about my faith crisis, not because my family is this way at all. My family actually does an excellent job at not being like this, but I would occasionally be around conversations where I realized if they knew where I was at with the church, they probably wouldn't be saying this in front of me, but they didn't know yet. But they were saying things that were unintentionally hurtful because they didn't realize where I was at. So being able to tell them, then they stopped saying those things around me. And who knows with your mom if she would stop or not. But at least you can then let her know. So then, if she says that next time, you can explain to her, that's actually incredibly hurtful as someone who is having a faith crisis or has left the church, Much easier said than done, but I do think that's something to consider when people are considering when to tell their family, because then you're at least giving them the opportunity to know where you're at. So hopefully, fingers crossed, they will be less offensive. Next submission. It recently occurred to me how odd it is that often people within the church support the church by pointing out incredibly intelligent people who are members. Like my dad is a rocket scientist and believing. Our now former dentist, a science teacher, an OB, a former FBI agent, etc. So smart, which shows the church must be true because otherwise there's no way it would fool those smart people. But the other side of that is no one ever notes how many incredibly intelligent people are not members. So many scientists, doctors, etc. are not members despite being so smart. I've never thought about that, flipping that argument that way, because theoretically, some of the smartest people in the world, probably, I don't know. I was going to say probably most of them. But I feel like Mormonism is mainstream enough now that, again, theoretically, some of the smartest people in the world, they should have heard of Mormonism and have some general understanding of Mormonism. So you would think, yes, if Mormonism is true, then the smartest brains in the world would be more prone to becoming Mormon, which is very much not the case. And very much, kind of undermines the argument of like the smart people Mormon thing. I shared a quote on my story that I recently found because oftentimes when I do a submission box, like a Sunday check-in or a campfire chat, a thing that I think a lot of us grapple with as ex-Mormons is there are very, very intelligent people who are members of the church. And I think that's difficult as an ex-Mormon for a number of reasons. I think in leaving the church, many of us feel like we have been duped. And so to feel like really smart people are currently being duped feels confusing. It also can just feel invalidating. Like, am I missing something if this person who seems so much smarter than me is somehow still a member and they seem smarter than me? It can get confusing. But I found this quote that I shared on my stories, and I've had a few people like asking after it again, because I feel like this sums up really well, like a big piece of that picture. So this is from Michael Shermer. Don't know much about him, but he wrote a book, Why People Believe Weird Things, Pseudoscience, Superstition, and Other Confusions of Our Time. And he says, smart people believe weird things because they are skilled at defending beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons. I have actually been delving back into my mission journals because I'm doing a Patreon episode about my mission journals, and I haven't done that really since my mission in any significant way. I've kind of skimmed and it's been too painful. So actually going back and reading enough of my mission journals to see my state of mind at that time, I've started to sort of do like a little exercise in my brain where it's like points for the cult versus points against the cult because, and I guess trigger warning maybe, I try not to use the word cult too much around Mormonism just because I've just found it's not the most productive word to casually talk about Mormonism as a cult. However, in my personal life, I do think I call it a cult sometimes, and I'm always kind of trying to pay attention to like, oh, there's this thing about Mormonism that's making it seem not so culty. Oh, but then there's this thing about Mormonism and that feels really culty. And so in my head, I'll be like, oh, points for the cult. And reading my mission journal, in a nutshell, was lots and lots and lots and lots of points for the cult because it feels like reading something from a person who was heavily under the influence of intense indoctrination. Or put more simply, though perhaps more provocatively, brainwashed, like a person who was brainwashed. And it's difficult because I was also much younger. That was almost 10 years ago now, I guess like 8. But the reason I bring up reading my mission journals in this context is because as I was reading, I was thinking, I'm not a stupid person. I never was a stupid person. Of course, I was young and naive and gullible and all of those things. And I think I've learned a lot. But I consider myself someone who was always a critical thinker to some extent. And and I got a 30 on the ACT, bitch. I'm just kidding. I'm not trying to say like I'm so smart. I'm just saying like I'm not dumb. We're not dumb. I'm talking to you too. Like we weren't members of the church because we were dumb. We were indoctrinated into believing something. And I think when you are a critical thinker, exactly as Michael Shermer said, you find ways to circumvent the obvious problems. Like I spent so much time when I was a Mormon, like coming up with all of these creative ways to make it make sense and to try and make it work. And there's this thing that I think people do, especially very like academic, intellectual people, where they actually really like the challenge of trying to make Mormonism make sense. And that almost makes them feel intellectually superior in a way, even though if you take a couple steps back, it's like, well, you're kind of just denying science and logic, etc. But they feel like they know something intellectually that other people can't quite understand. And because if you're really smart, then you're kind of able to more smartly convince yourself to stick to the status quo, to not implode everything you've ever believed. Like at the core of any human, you probably don't want to just abandon the religion that has taught you everything you know. So super smart people can find super smart reasons to try and convince themselves to stay. Next question. Serious question. If you didn't have the podcast and you could have a job doing anything, work history and degrees aside, what would you do? I haven't thought about this in a long time. This is a really good introspective question for, I think, anyone to think about. Like in another timeline, what would I be doing? The first thing that came to mind for me is being an author of some sort, leading up probably to eventually writing a book, but I feel like it would be really cool to be a full-time author of articles. I'm on Substack now. I haven't actually spent that much time on there, but I signed up and I've kind of browsed and skimmed. I'm making myself familiar with Substack, and I'm feeling just so much more drawn to long-form content as I'm making long-form content right now. But I don't know. It's easy to get caught up in the social media game, especially with short-form stuff. And writing is very different. It's a very different part of my brain than podcasting, not so, there's overlap for sure. All of this to say, I think it would be really cool to write more, but I'm so out of practice. It's really hard. I'm really out of practice. I've always found writing incredibly fulfilling, but incredibly difficult. So even though I want to write more, it's just hard. So I'd maybe say author if I could ever hack it. I also think I would really enjoy teaching. I think especially teaching older young adults, maybe like college age, maybe high school. I don't know if I have the patience. I think the day-to-day of that job feels a lot more difficult for me, but I do think teaching would be really great. I'm trying to think if there's any like wackadoodle out there thing that I would love to do. This is not fully answering the question because this would mean I would have to have an entirely different skill set that I do not have, and I don't have a propensity for this, but I am very envious of people who work with their hands, especially artists and like artisans who create things with their hands. I was even thinking that about my tattoo artist. Like as he was tattooing me, I was like, there's something so satisfying about doing tangible visual, physical work. I've always felt this way about artists. I have a lot of friends who do art that I'm just very envious of because I think creating something visual with your hands sounds awesome. I want to start figuring out a way I can do that. As someone who has pretty much negative 1,000 artistic talent, I might pick up crocheting this year. We'll see. But yeah, maybe in another life, I'm a skilled sculptor or something like that. Wouldn't that be nice? Next submission. I'm moving into a new apartment with my boyfriend for the first time. Do you have any advice on how to make a house feel like a home? Can't dedicate it anymore and I'm lost. I forgot about dedicating a home. This is a practice in Mormonism, at least. I don't know if any other religions do this, but when you get a new home, you can dedicate it. So you basically just say like a dedication prayer and like bless the home or whatever, which, yeah, that's actually a nice little ritual. Now that I think about it, not actually doing that in that way, but having some sort of tradition or ritual for dedicating a space. I'm sure there is tons of cool stuff you could look into, just like Google it, about like saging your home or things like that, like in that realm, if that interests you. I feel like that could be kind of like a fun, special way to reclaim some sort of spiritual tradition. Just find something that resonates with you. But my other thought was throw a housewarming party. I think housewarming parties are so fun. You don't have to have everything set up yet. And maybe you'll get some gifts. Like people might bring you nice candles or a plant or something like that. I have a plant. Actually, it did just die. But I had a plant for almost 3 years that my friend gave me as a housewarming gift. And it was this pretty plant and I put it by the sink and it lasted forever. And it was always fun to kind of watch it grow and be like, oh, we've had this as long as we've had the house and now it's dead. So maybe we need to sell the house. I don't know what that omen is. But I think a housewarming party is a really fun way to celebrate that milestone because that's a big deal. Congratulations. That's really exciting. And making a house a home for me in a huge way is about being able to host, like inviting people in. And so I think a housewarming party is a really fun way to do that. Was anyone else taught growing up in the Mormon church that the Catholic Church is the equivalent of the Great and Abominable Church and or the Great and Spacious Building? I definitely was, and now it's particularly funny because my boyfriend grew up New Jersey Italian Catholic, and his family / several friends at home are quite Catholic. It's been so interesting to see what I was raised to believe Catholicism is versus what it actually is. And of course, it always just comes down to all organized religion has the same problematic foundations no matter what flavor you add to it. Yes, I tend to agree. The Catholic Church being the Great and Abominable Church. I forgot about this. There is a scripture in the Book of Mormon, which I will read to you, and I also did some deep diving because I remember learning that growing up as well. I remember reading the scripture in the Book of Mormon and having discussions in Sunday school where we were talking about what is the Great and Abominable Church, and I remember learning in some way that it was the Catholic Church specifically. But then as I got older, I feel like the church kind of backed away from that. And I was like, maybe I just made that up. We didn't just make that up. So in the Book of Mormon, in 1st Nephi, Nephi refers to a mysterious entity called, quote, the Great and Abominable Church. It's described as the church that persecutes the saints, removes plain and precious truth from the Bible, and is the mother of harlots. It's crazy. This language, I think this is why it stuck out to so many of us growing up in the church, is like, it's really harsh, this particular language. In the early Mormon church, like the 19th and early 20th centuries, many Mormon leaders and scholars taught explicitly or implicitly that this referred to the Roman Catholic Church. This interpretation aligned with the common sentiment at the time of Protestants against Catholics. I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know that tidbit, but Catholicism and Protestantism, if I said that right, are obviously in opposition in a lot of ways because it's a branch off from Catholicism. And so it makes sense that Mormonism, which was this new religion, this American religion, was kind of aligning with the Protestant sentiment against Catholicism. Bruce R. McConkie, this was in 1958, so as recently as 1958, directly identified the Catholic Church as the Great and Abominable Church. He said, and it doesn't get any clearer than this, the Roman Catholic Church is the great and abominable church of apostasy. He then went on to say that all churches or organizations of whatever name or nature, whether political, philosophical, educational, economic, social, fraternal, civic, or religious, which are designed to take men on a course that leads away from God and his laws, and thus from salvation in the kingdom of God, can also qualify as like a symbolic great and abominable church. So I feel like for me growing up, I kind of learned both. Like I learned that it was symbolic and it just meant basically anything that wasn't Mormonism, which take a minute to sit on that. Anything that's not Mormonism, essentially, because that would be leading people away from the one true church. The one true way to get to God is great and abominable and the mother of all harlots. That's crazy enough in and of itself. However, when Bruce R. McConkie said that it was the Roman Catholic Church specifically, there was a ton of backlash, as you can imagine, from both outside the church and inside the church. And he actually revised that quote that was in a book, and it is no longer said that it's the Roman Catholic Church. By the 1979 edition, the direct reference to the Roman Catholic Church as the Great and Abominable Church was deleted. That was interesting to remember because I find myself feeling defensive of Mormonism against greater mainstream Christianity, whether that's evangelical, Catholic, because it's easy to make Mormonism the butt of the joke. I know that better than probably anyone. It's very easy to pick on Mormonism, and I do think it's very valid. I think it's very fair, obviously. However, when I see Christians doing it, I feel defensive because I feel like Mormonism is so much more similar to mainstream Christianity than it is different. And oftentimes the things that they're poking fun at, I feel like mainstream Christianity is also doing, just in a little bit more diluted way. So I get defensive. But I had someone send me a reel recently, and I'm pretty sure it was from Word Radio, that god-awful Mormon apologist podcast. But the person in that reel said that the Bible is full of, what did they say? They said it in the craziest way. They basically were shit-talking the Bible and saying the Bible has all of these false things in it and how lucky we are as Mormons because we have the Book of Mormon that clarifies the Bible. And, you know, that's a big Mormon thing. There's a lot of interpretations of the Bible, so we have the Book of Mormon to make it more clear, which it doesn't, but there you have it. And I realized as I was watching this reel and also reading the comments, how upsetting and rude that is to every other Christian religion to say, yeah, you have the Bible and the Bible's good, but it's not quite right and you don't have the whole truth. And also within the Book of Mormon that the Mormons believe, it says that you are the great and abominable church and leading people astray through the devil, basically. That's not a very friendly stance to take against the rest of Christian religions. And so it makes a lot of sense why Mormonism is such an outlier. And it's interesting to see Mormonism try more and more to buddy up with other Christian religions and emphasize the Church of Jesus Christ and those types of things and try and fit in with mainstream Christianity when a huge tenet of Mormonism is that every other church is wrong because every other church is leading people astray. And that's also different than I think the main sentiment in Christian religions, although I do think it's still there at the core, but I think they're much better at saying like, I'm Protestant, you're Catholic, all roads lead to God. Like at least we all believe in Jesus and want to be saved through Jesus, even if we don't agree exactly on the specific terms. I think Mormonism hasn't done a great job of that, and now they're trying to make up for lost time. And so it just gave me more understanding why people are so harsh on Mormonism, who are still very Christian religious, because a lot of Mormon leaders have said really shitty things, whether explicitly or implicitly, about other Christian religions. Next submission. I saw a video the other day from a Mormon content creator talking about you and the video you made in that, quote, immodest green dress in front of the temple. And they called you an atheist and proceeded to say how disrespectful you were, etc. I got so mad when they were talking about this because A, you're not an atheist. B, you were at a family's wedding and they told you it was okay to wear that dress because you are so considerate and asked beforehand, which you didn't have to do. And C, they don't know you and clearly took no time to understand the situation. Ugh. Anyway, it pissed me off and I just wanted to ask how you deal with so many people misunderstanding you or judging you when they get so many facts wrong and all that. I feel like you're such a genuine, kind, and considerate person. Thank you. And I feel sad so many people must misunderstand you, and I'm just curious how you deal with being okay letting others misunderstand you. Yeah, thank you. That's very thoughtful of you to ask and to be up in arms about that post. I did not see that post, actually. Now I'm kind of curious, but I think I'm going to spare myself and not track it down. What they're talking about is I made a video. It was actually at my sister's wedding. This was like over a year ago. They just had their anniversary. And I was wearing a dress that was a tank top dress, and it had like a little keyhole, like in the bust, kind of. I didn't have my boob job yet, unfortunately. Actually, I'd like to try on that dress again now that I'm thinking about it with the new twins, the new girls. Anyway, I was waiting outside the temple and I had an idea to do a TikTok to the audio, "Tell Jesus that the bitch is back," because how funny is that? Like in front of the Mormon temple. So my cousin filmed it, like my Mormon cousin filmed it. I posted it and people were really upset, mostly by the fact that they deemed the dress I was wearing immodest to wear to a temple wedding. I didn't go in the temple. I'm not allowed. It was outside of the temple. I did check with my sister. I sent her the dress. It was within the color scheme. She had no problem with it. So no one in my real life had a problem with it, but a lot of people on the internet did. And I actually realized with that one, with like the pushback I got on that I still had, I think I still do, but at that point, a lot more so, I still had a lot of shame around modesty stuff. And I think the pushback was really hard for me because I wasn't as secure in that decision as maybe I thought I was to wear like a tank top dress. And now that so much time has passed, I genuinely could not care less. Like if someone's like, "You look like a whore outside the temple," I'm like, cool, because I do feel very secure. Like I've thought it through and I feel great about the decision I made to wear that dress and post that video. And I think it's funny. All of that to say, when it comes to people misunderstanding, to your point, yes, it's easier to write it off when these people so clearly don't know me. There was this other video that was absolutely awful. There's some Mormon apologist, like Women in the Priesthood YouTube account, that made a video about LDS feminists and like ex-LDS feminists. She was really quite awful, mostly towards Julie Hanks. Julie Hanks is a progressive Mormon feminist. She's a therapist and she's done a lot of incredible work, especially with bridging gaps between ex-Mormons and Mormons. She has an Instagram following. She does therapy, but she recently announced that she's getting divorced, Julie Hanks. And so this Mormon woman, took it upon herself to make a whole video basically saying anything that Julie Hanks has ever said about marriage and family or whatever is completely debunked now that she got divorced, which is such a crazy thing to say on so many levels, and was just saying, these Mormon feminists think they can have it all. They think they can be progressive and they can be man-hating feminists and still be married, and that's just not how it works. And here's the evidence because Julie Hanks is divorced. Really so shitty and so wrong. And she also mentioned me, this creator, and she was like showing my page. And as she was talking about me, just everything she said was just so not who I am. It was just based on a very superficial understanding of like my content, which even if you know my content completely front to back, that's also not who I am entirely. But she was talking about me and saying that I'm trying to make Mormonism seem less cool and I'm trying to like be hip about being ex-Mormon, which I'm like, cool, yeah, okay, I'll take that. But then she was saying, yeah, she's single and she doesn't have kids and she's super wealthy. I was just like, okay, so she really doesn't know me. Like she didn't even take time to do her research. So that helps, knowing that oftentimes these people saying these things, like they've seen one video of mine. I feel like having a podcast, I feel really confident that if anyone listens to my actual podcast, yes, I'm going to post a cheeky video saying, tell Jesus the bitch is back. And then I'm going to come on my podcast and I'm going to talk at length about what it means to respect the members in your life and how complicated that is and how it does matter, I think, to show respect to the believing members in your life. But at what cost to you? Like it's a whole conversation and we're having those conversations in depth, I think thoughtfully, hopefully, not perfectly, of course. But, you know, if someone sees that one video and they want to say she's disrespectful and she's this and that, that's fine. That's based on an interpretation because of one video. Being misunderstood, though, even just on a personal level, like in real life, not on the internet, is one of the hardest things ever. It's so hard to feel misunderstood. And kind of goes back to the locus of control thing I've been going through in therapy of just realizing I could try. I mean, you can never win that game. You can never win the game of trying to get everyone to understand you because they won't, whether it's your mom or your friend or the person on the internet. And so you have to let that go. I'm speaking to myself here, or else you'll just always be miserable because you'll always feel misunderstood. And I think, you know, you find the people that do understand you, and even those people sometimes don't completely understand you, and that's okay. But you find people who are willing to try and understand you, and you're willing to try and understand them. And those are the people that matter. And anyone else is kind of irrelevant, quite frankly. Like it doesn't matter what this random person who made that video thought of me. It doesn't matter. And again, I'm not saying I always feel that way when I see it. It hurts sometimes, but for the most part, like I've gotten better at that, of just realizing like I can't control what everyone thinks of me all the time. So I gotta stay true to myself. Sorry for going a little David Goggins on you, or Mel Robbins. That was more Mel Robbins-esque, very like self-help girl boss vibes on that one. Ooh, this one's really interesting. I feel like oftentimes themes emerge in the submissions, which is fun, like different people kind of like tackling certain things from multiple perspectives. So I feel like this one ties in to a lot of things we've been talking about. Confession. As I feel a lot of people can relate, when I was active in the church, I felt the biggest superiority complex over people that were not in the church. I felt like I knew something that they didn't, and I was better than them. Now I sometimes feel like I have a superiority complex over current members. Like I'm out here on the other side living my best life and feel like I low-key escaped a cult and they don't realize. At the end of the day, I genuinely respect their beliefs. We can have a conversation about beliefs, but if they can believe what they want, and I will believe what I want. But I sometimes just feel better than them because I can have sex and buy ice cream on Sundays and drink coffee on the way to work, and they can't. Yeah, I've been trying to check myself on this one too. And this kind of goes back to the like, how can smart people be Mormons? And there was a lot of things which I think as I'm increasingly distanced from it, I'm growing less and less sensitive to it, and I just kind of care less, which is, I don't know, you could argue a good or a bad thing. But I remember when I first started this podcast, which was over 2 years ago now, I was really concerned with not having that attitude of like, I left the church, so I know more and I'm better. And I'm not thinking that now that I'm better than people who are still in the church, but I'm just not as concerned about the way that I talk about my own experience with leaving the church is going to sound to people still in the church or people on the fence, if that makes sense. And it's a delicate line to walk, back to the being misunderstood thing, because yeah, I don't ever want to come off of like, I'm so much more enlightened and da-da-da-da, because to this person's point, I felt like that is something I wanted to leave behind with being Mormon, is feeling more enlightened, feeling superior, feeling like I had all the answers and I know something that you don't know. And I don't like being that way. I think the biggest distinction for me that I always come back to is I don't feel better than people who are Mormon or who are religious. I do think that the distinction is important, that they do think they still have all the answers. I don't think I have all the answers. I'm very much trying to figure things out, and I'm trying to figure things out for myself, where I think oftentimes, not everyone, but oftentimes religion breeds this idea that they have the right answers for everyone else, not just for themselves. And so that's kind of the biggest line I draw is like, to this person, like, you want to have sex and you want to get coffee on the way to work, and that feels like so good for you. But even another ex-Mormon, they might not be drinking coffee. They might not be having sex. And I don't think you would say to that person, like, well, I'm better than you because I'm choosing to have sex. You're just making those choices now on your terms. And I think when you're making choices on your own terms, it's easier to let people make choices on their own terms. What's hard to do is see people that you feel like are making choices not on their own terms under an influence that you were once under. And so it's always this kind of constant back and forth. I think it's a really important thing to check yourself on as an ex-Mormon to, that's a good reminder for me, honestly, because I definitely can get on my high horse. And I think within certain company, like, I think that's totally fair, let it out. But I do think, generally speaking, like, yeah, it's just always better to try and see that everyone's just trying to do their best. Next submission, confession. They also started the same way, confession, period. I really want to participate in 420 this year, but due to fear and conditioning from my childhood, I'm scared and don't know how to work through the emotions or conditioning. Okay, when is 420? As related to when this will air. Okay, we got a good amount of time. Oh yeah, it's only the 5th of April. My concept of time right now is like so out of whack. I'm assuming they're saying they just want to smoke weed for the first time or do weed in some way on April 20th. Why did 420 become weed day? What about 420 makes it weed related? Pause. Hold the phone. While we're doing confessions, I have a confession to make, which is I am very much back on my Chat GPT grind. I was using it a lot and kind of promoting it, like talking about it. And then people were saying it's really, really bad for the environment. And then I was like, okay, I'm not going to use it anymore. And then I saw more things saying it's actually really not. I do try and use Google if it's something I can just Google. And I'm really trying to like set boundaries with Chat GPT and not use it to like do any work that my brain doesn't want to do for me, but I do think it can be a really useful tool. So ChatGPT says, 420 is like the unofficial weed holiday. The origin is a mix of urban legend and stoner folklore. Stoner folklore. That's fun. The most credible version goes like this. In the early 1970s, a group of high school students in San Rafael, California, who called themselves the Waldos, used to meet up at 420 after school to search for an abandoned cannabis crop they'd heard rumors about. They'd say 420 to each other as a kind of code word for meeting up to smoke weed. How it blew up, they had a connection to people in the Grateful Dead scene, and that's how the term spread through concerts, fans, and eventually the broader counterculture. By the 1990s, High Times magazine picked it up, helping cement April 20th, 420, as the cannabis celebration day. Cute, 420. You should celebrate if you're wanting to. I know there is lots of conditioning. I think you could wait to get over the conditioning, or you could just try it, and that could be a part of getting over the conditioning. I think it's going to be different for everyone. For me, I tried it before I had fully like unpacked the conditioning, and I think it was part of me unpacking was just trying weed. I know they've been a sponsor. This is not currently sponsored, although I do have a code, so I don't know. But I really love Early Bird, especially for people who are first wanting to try weed. The reasons why are because it is very controllable. If you're smoking, you don't know how much you're getting. An edible, like a gummy, which is what Early Bird is, you know exactly how much you're getting. Early bird is nice because it's a small dose of THC and it has a lot of cannabis. So I think it's just a more naturally like calming sensation. And you can just take even half a gummy, see what happens, take the other half. It's very easy to build up with gummies. And I would just camp out at home, get cozy, be with someone you trust, and just try an early bird and see what happens. And hopefully it's a blast because it absolutely is for me. Next question. How do you get your partner to be more involved? I've brought up the fact that I do everything for our toddler. Mealtime, bath time, with them during the night. He thinks his 30 minutes of playtime while I make dinner is helpful, but then he is usually on his phone while I do everything else. Does my husband just suck, or are men really this clueless? Ooh, what a loaded question. I want Bentley to come back on the podcast because we are by no means perfect at this. But we have gotten a lot better, and we have worked really hard and done a lot of therapy to get a lot better at sharing the load of like household labor, emotional labor too, especially with kids. And it is a constant thing. I think that there's so much that goes into it. I think to answer your question, I think there is so much social conditioning. And then I also think that men should be anxious to and willing to improve and learn. And so it sucks oftentimes as the woman to be the one who has to like also teach, because that's also emotional labor. But when we were in therapy, my therapist kind of laid it out where she was like, you are going to have to teach your husband how to be more involved and more helpful, because he just was never taught that growing up. And some men are more so than others, depending on the family they come from, the culture they come from. If we're talking Mormon here, which I'm guessing we're talking, I feel like that's an even bigger problem as far as magnifying like men just feeling like they don't have to do shit for kids or around the house. That is definitely not an equal sharing of the load for your husband to play with your kid while you're making dinner for him and your kid. And I think it's important you have a serious conversation. The conversations are hard to have because there's defensiveness, there's all these things. This is why I would love to bring Bentley on, because I think getting like his perspective on this would be really helpful, because he's just gone through this with me too. I feel like I've talked about it a lot. So I'm going to put a pin in that and stay tuned, because hopefully soon, like maybe even this month, Bentley and I can sit down and just talk about like sharing the load, what it's like that we're both working, how we split up the childcare and the house care and stuff. And hopefully that will be helpful. I'm sorry. It's really hard. Like one of the hardest things, certainly the hardest thing we've had to work through in our marriage. But I do think there's hope if he's willing to listen and try, and it takes time. But if there's no willingness to try, then I tend to be more on the side of your husband might suck, and I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time weaning my baby. The mental struggle is because of the phrase, quote, your breasts will be used for pure and virtuous principles. I've never heard that one. Your breasts will be used for pure and virtuous principles. I don't even believe that anymore. I firmly believe breastfeeding is such a privilege and I'm ready to have my body back. Yet I can't get myself to hold to my boundaries and stop because I am able to continue to nurse her, and it's so ingrained into me that my only purpose is to be a mom, so my body really is hers. Ugh, all around just sucks. That really sucks. I pumped, so I didn't nurse, but I did breastfeed in kind of, I guess, a roundabout way with the twins. I pumped for 6 months. So I would pump and then feed them breast milk in a bottle. It just made more sense for a lot of reasons, especially because my girls were premature. This is always a fascinating conversation to have, and it's very tender and very personal for women, understandably so. I told myself that I was going to pump for 6 months. I didn't make that goal before I had kids because I didn't know what was going to happen. But once I knew, okay, I can pump, it's possible, I said, I'm going to do 6 months. And as I approached 6 months, I had a lot of things kick in where I was like, well, I hate this. It's really time consuming. It's really hard. I'm ready to like, even things like when you're breastfeeding, like going to the gym is even hard. You're still leaking. It's a whole thing. And I told myself, I'm going to do this for 6 months and I'm going to honor that. And at 6 months, I'm going to stop. And could I have gone on longer? yes, theoretically I could, but I knew for me and my mental health and my body that I needed to honor what I said, which was I'm going to stop at 6 months. So what I would say to you is honor yourself. You said you're ready to wean. So I would wean. And I feel like I would try and reframe that as seeing that as like really honoring yourself and keeping a commitment to yourself. And also honoring what you did. You've breastfed for however long. That's an incredible feat. That's so amazing. I know it's so emotional to stop doing that. So I've heard, and I can absolutely understand why. But I think this would be a really good practice in keeping the commitment to yourself and understanding that you deserve to keep commitments to yourself as well. And I think that also sets a really good precedent for motherhood and parenthood. We could always do more. We could always do more as parents, always. And once you understand that, you also understand that at some point you have to draw a boundary or you will get absolutely swallowed whole. And that's not going to be good for your kids either. So it's tricky, it's case by case, but you got this. And yeah, the whole boob thing with like, our bodies are meant to do this. This is like the one purpose of our bodies. Let me just be here to tell you, like, no, it's beautiful that your body can do that your breasts can feed your baby, but that's not the one sole purpose of your body and your breasts. And I'm sorry you were taught that. And a lot of us were taught that, but you deserve to, you deserve to wean. And I hope you do. Good luck. I know it's hard. It's like physically painful and also emotionally painful. So in solidarity with you. Oh my gosh, this one is so funny. This last weekend, my mother-in-law gifted my kids a puzzle of Jesus. They are extreme Mormons and we are ex-Mormon. My son, he's 6, looked at the puzzle and said, well, this is weird because we don't even know if Jesus is real. My mother-in-law burst into tears and I had to go get her tissues. It was horrifyingly awkward. Oh, why do I love that 6-year-old boy? That's so funny. Because it sounds like he wasn't even saying like, Grandma, I'm not Mormon. He was like, we actually don't even know if Jesus, the historical figure, was exactly what we've been taught he is. And I love that your 6-year-old knows that. Kids, man, I'm starting to feel this with my girls because they're getting older and they're just going to start like noticing things and be like, oh, grandma goes to church. What's church? Like, it's just going to become more and more of a thing. But I mean, sounds like the mother-in-law was like really broken up about it, which that's its whole other thing. Cause like, can we just appreciate he's just a 6-year-old kid and he's been taught differently. And it's funny. Like, that's a funny thing to say regardless of what you think about Jesus. In my opinion, kids just say funny things. But it sounds like that it did not strike her that way. So that does seem very awkward. It's hard to navigate that with family. And I'll keep you updated because I don't doubt that my kids will start saying things like that as well. Though I don't think any of my family on either side will be giving us a Jesus puzzle. My mom still talks about, and she thinks it's the funniest thing ever. She took I think I've shared this on here, but I think it's the cutest thing. She took my girls to church. This was a while ago. So they were like 2. And she asked, and I said she could. She was watching them one day and she took them to church. And she took one of my daughters out into the foyer at one point because she was like antsy. And she looked around the foyer and looked at my mom and goes, what is this place? And we laugh about that. We think it's really funny. Someone says, my husband and I were laughing about how when I left the church, I was genuinely so sad when I realized I won't have, quote, a perfect knowledge in heaven, because now I won't know the answer to all the cold case true crime podcasts I listen to. I'm honestly still sad I will never know what happened to John Benet Ramsey. I've never thought about this. But basically, you're told as a Mormon, you'll eventually like have all the answers to everything, of course, because you'll die and go to heaven. And so you'll just like be able to have access to anything that ever happened to anyone, like the truth of anything. That's a hard pill to swallow, honestly. Like, we're never going to know what happened to John Benet Ramsey. We'll just never know. Some people know, but those are the only people that will actually ever know. Like, if you don't believe in an omniscient, like all-knowing God, then the only people that know are the people that know. That's why true crime is so fascinating. I mean, obviously, not that this is the most insane insight, but I'm just realizing it's so fascinating to listen to true crime because it's like no one knows the actual truth. And so you get so into it because you're like, well, what actually happened though? Like what happened? Who actually did it? And you can have a hunch, you can think you know, but to not actually know for sure is really frustrating. And I'm sorry, what a thing to grieve when leaving Mormonism, not knowing the actual story of John Benet Ramsey. Next submission. Pretty sure if I get a tattoo, my husband will divorce me. I'm feeling scared already. I have left the church and he is still very active. I have explained the significance of the tattoo I would want because yes, I've picked the tattoo and the location, but he just sees it as a declaration of my lack of commitment to our marriage. Because if I have a tattoo, I will not be coming back to the church and won't keep my covenants from when we were sealed. So the question is, ... when should I get the tattoo? Oh, I'm sorry. And it does indeed sound like you have bigger fish to fry because it's not really about the tattoo. It sounds like he thinks if you get the tattoo, that is the final straw and you're really not coming back and he's not okay with you never coming back. And so it might be time to have what sounds like an incredibly difficult conversation about the fact that it doesn't seem like you're ever wanting to go back. And that sounds super, super hard with someone who's in that mentality. The tattoo thing is interesting also because I thought that the church recently kind of loosened the restrictions on that. They didn't say tattoos are okay, but it used to be that in the Strength of Youth pamphlet, they said no tattoos. And I think they took that out. So I've been seeing Mormons get tattoos. I know actually a handful of Mormons who are very active that have tattoos. So that's interesting that that's his line in the sand, but it does seem like it goes much deeper than that. And I'm sorry too about the tattoo thing because you should get to decide if you put a tattoo on your body. And yeah, when should I get the tattoo? I think you deserve to have that tattoo. And I'm sorry that you're with someone who's trying to control you that way. Okay, last one. Stumbling upon Jeffrey R. Holland's latest Instagram reel, speaking directly to the youth, feels oddly like a threatening message from a mob boss using very manipulative language and wearing a huge ass sapphire ring. Jeff, I'm scared of you. I was LOLing when I read that because my friend showed me that reel. This was a few weeks ago and they were like, have you seen this? And I was like, why is Jeffrey R. Holland? I'm not joking. I'm not even kidding. I said, why is he acting like a mob boss? So you're not alone. It's very much giving mob boss energy. He's wearing this big fat ring. He's sitting on a chair, all mob boss-esque. And the things he's saying are just very manipulative to my ex-Mormon brain now. I'll link it. I was gonna try and find it and play it on the microphone, but the last thing I need is the Mormon church coming for my account again. So I'm not going to do that because don't want to mess with fire, don't want to mess with copyright infringement from the Mormon church, but I will link the reel because yeah, it's giving mob boss, which is especially funny from Jeffrey R. Holland, who I feel has always been branded as teddy bear loving, very emotional apostle. And I don't know, maybe he doesn't feel like that's working as well. So he's put his mob boss cap on. Feels a little more fitting to me personally. I actually have one other quick story to share. I want to share this before I forget. I'm going to be very vague about who this person is to me as not to, I want them to be able to remain anonymous. But I was talking with someone and they're a lovely person, but we were talking and they ended up asking about the podcast and they're like, how's the podcast going? And I was just said whatever. And then they said, they were like, yeah, I don't know. It just feels like if someone was smoking, if someone was a smoker and then they tried to quit smoking, then they wouldn't go and talk about smoking all the time. I'm really proud of myself because in moments like this, as fiery as I may sometimes get on this mic, in my real life, that is sometimes less easy to access. And also just picking my battles, I'm sometimes just okay, whatever. Try to change the subject. But I was like, actually, that's really interesting. I kind of can't believe I said this, but in the conversation with this person, before they asked about my podcast, we had talked about two things in the conversation. One of them being I had asked this person how they were doing, and they told me that they were feeling extra spiritual lately and had been like really relying on prayer. And I was like, that's awesome. Good for you. And then they had talked to me about the garments and how excited they were about the tank top garments. And I was like, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. That's great. You get I'm excited. You get to wear tank tops. And then they said that to me about smoking, and a smoker who quit smoking wouldn't keep talking about smoking. Also, I was like, have you heard of AA? Like, people who are actual addicts, they actually do have to talk about their addiction like once a week for the rest of forever. You don't just like never talk about it again. Also, leaving Mormonism, not very similar to stopping smoking, really at all. But I said to this person, I was like, oh yeah, like I actually don't see it that way at all for a number of reasons. But I said to them, I was like, that's interesting because we've actually like talked about the church already in this conversation. So you can see that like the church is still very much present for me, whether I want it to be or not, because like you just talked about the church. But now I'm not allowed to talk about the church. I didn't say this part. And they were kind of like, oh yeah, it was fine. But I was like, that's funny because you feel like you can talk about the church to me, knowing that I've left it. But then me talking about leaving the church on a platform completely separate from you, you have these opinions on, and you're like trying to tell me it's unhealthy. Anyway, I'm just bringing that one up to get it off my chest because I've just been like, the more I've reflected on it, the more I'm like, what an odd thing to say. That's a TikTok audio. If you know, you know. Anyway, thanks for letting me vent. Thanks for letting me share. Thanks for sharing with me. Can't wait to talk to you soon. I'm cooking up some merch. Dare I say, I'm cooking up some merch. Hopefully in time for like the weather to really get warm. I've heard things on the wind that people are wanting a modest isn't hottest tank. And I think we're going to try and find a strap, like a strappy one, like a spaghetti strap one, considering the recent garment change. So stay tuned for that. If you want the updates between episodes, you can find me at Girls Camp Podcast on Instagram, Girls Camp Podcast on YouTube, Haley Rawl on TikTok. And if you want 2 bonus episodes a month and a community chat and some inside scoop, if you will, then you can join us over at patreon.com/girlscamp. Talk to you soon. Bye.